until in my early 20s, I thought the path for being an artist was that you make the thing that you want to do for a living. And then
Mhm.
eventually somebody just kind of finds you doing that.
Mhm.
They sort of open up the shed doors, right? And then you're like startled by the light and the sound of it. And then they say, come with me, right? And then they lead you. So I think that that is what I thought the path was.
In this interview, I'm speaking with Mike Lowery, the New York Times bestselling author-illustrator who's worked on dozens of books for children and adults. When I looked him up in my local library system, more than 80 listings came up. In addition to books, Mike has worked on many other types of projects like food trucks, greeting cards, self published zines, and so much more. And he is the founder of the extremely popular online course Getting Paid to Draw, which is launching in a few days after the release of this video. Look it up at gettingpaidtodraw.com. And who am I? I'm Jana Morishima. I'm a literary agent specializing in visual storytelling and the founder of Kids Comics Unite. Kids Comics Unite is an online community offering courses, competitions, and community for comics creators working in children's publishing. If you like this video, please leave a comment and hit subscribe. Check us out at kidscomicsunite.com. So in this interview, I wanted to find out Mike Lowery's secrets, exactly how he has published so many books, built such a fan base, and launched such a popular course. Tell me what you wanted to be when you grew up, when you were a kid.
Ooh, this is a good question. I wanted to be, I'm going to answer the question that you didn't ask first, which is what would I be if I was not an author and an illustrator? You didn't ask, but maybe this is interesting right off the top. I'm going to say maybe a dentist. It's this thing that I have clung to that I thought, okay, what did I want to be when I was young? I 100% when I was young, I wanted to be a newspaper comic artist. And I do have kind of an interesting story about that. I could say it now, I could say it a little bit later. I wanted to be a newspaper comic artist. It's weird. I read a lot of comic books, but for some reason, and I drew comic characters when I was very little. But I don't know that I remember wanting to actually make comic books. I was a huge fan, The Far Side, and there's
Mhm.
this one called Non Sequitur
Mhm.
by this guy named Wiley that of
Mhm.
course, Bill Watterson, who did
Mhm.
Calvin and Hobbes, little underground comic, Calvin and
Mhm.
Hobbes. And then later, as I got older, I got into Bone, Jeff
Mhm.
Smith's Bone that would have been junior high maybe or early high school. I think it's
Mhm.
junior high. And then eventually I realized I wanted to do alternative comics.
Mhm.
And then later I made picture books.
So, did you tell your parents I wanna be a comics artist?
Well, 100%. I mean, it was the only thing people knew of me was that no, probably not. But I will say I went through this stage and I actually, I have all of my sketchbooks ever, right? It's this funny thing. I'm sure you've had it before where you'll be showing sketchbooks or you'll hear an artist talk about sketchbooks and then people will inevitably, adults, never kids, but
Mhm.
adults will inevitably, someone will say, you should really hold on to those, or like, what do you do with them when you're done? And I'm like, it's the most precious thing in my home that isn't a living being, right? So I have mine for real. I have mine in like a fireproof thing. If,
Mhm.
something were to happen, I can't replace them. But I was looking through some of mine from childhood and I saw some of the, let's say, politically driven comics that I was trying to make, which were super uninformed. It's real dumb,
Mhm.
but yeah, thankfully social media didn't exist where everything that anyone's ever made exists because
Mhm.
I'm glad I had like 30 years of like learning how to be a human before the history of Mike Lowery became like online or whatever. You know what I mean? Anyway.
Oh, interesting. You specifically said 30 years, so I wanna know, like, is that do you feel like your career officially started around age 30?
No, I think it started earlier than that, but I think around age 30, when I was around 30, which was
Uh-huh.
around 15 years ago, is when
Uh,
I think maybe I'm getting the timing wrong on that. 'Cause I guess
mhm.
Facebook is older than that, but I feel like that's when more people were like putting out everything.
Right,
Do you know
right,
what I
right.
mean? And I
Yeah.
was already old enough to where I wasn't really that interested in showing off what I was
Uh-huh.
having for dinner or whatever.
Mhm. Uh-huh.
And so I guess that's what I meant.
Okay,
Is
got
that,
it.
yeah.
So, did you go to art school?
Sorta. I went to a very small liberal arts school. There was only
Mhm.
2,500 students total, and they had everything from pre-med or whatever, and then
Mhm.
also arts. So I was in an art program, but it was
Mhm.
my degree is just art,
Mhm.
but with an emphasis in painting and drawing. And then initially it was graphic design.
Okay. So I what I wanna know is if you can remember back to when you were in college and studying art and thinking like, "Okay, I'm gonna become" whatever you thought at that time, like a comics artist. What did you think then would be like the path that you would take to become a professional working artist?
Well, I think for a long time, I think in terms of a path, I'll talk about it in that way, and then I'll talk about what my emphasis was or what I thought I would do. I think that until in my early 20s, I thought the path for being an artist was that you make the thing that you want to do for a living, and then
Mhm.
eventually somebody just kind of finds you doing that.
Mhm.
They sort of open up the shed doors, right? And then you're like startled by the light and the sound of it, and then they say, "Come with me," right? And then they lead you. So, I think that that is what I thought the path was. And I do genuinely think that I thought that for a long time. But I think because when you said, "What did I wanna be when I was young?" It was comic artist or, newspaper comic strip artist. And then as I went to apply for school, it was the late '90s, and everybody was talking about graphic design.
Mhm.
Luckily, there's not one big technology topic that everybody's talking about right now. Can we j
Luckily, thank God.
can we do this entire thing and not talk about AI at all? Is that an option?
I actually
'Cause
don't have AI in the list of questions.
that's perfect. Good. I mean, not that it's not a thing worth discussing, but man, is it just exhausting. But so I went to school for graphic design initially because when I was applying and thinking about how to make a living as an artist, I didn't really know that much about being an illustrator. I didn't go to school for illustration. I did really start to get into picture books in I wrote my own stories when I was in high school, but with this
Mhm.
idea also that, I didn't know how to make the connection of liking to
Right.
do something and what to do. I don't know that I thought of doing it as a job or whatever.
Mhm.
And then I had a few very subtle voices that just kind of said, yeah, maybe graphic design is better financially.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
just, like a lot of things that you look back on in your life and you go, did I really think that through or whatever?
Mhm.
Anyway, I went into it and I'm just going to say real quickly, I had this really great professor or teacher my first 2 years of college who taught graphic design, and it was like this way of life, and it was really exciting. He left,
Mhm.
and they brought in somebody else who was not as strong of an instructor, but at the same time, I had a drawing teacher who has become a mentor to me, is this guy named Bill Houston,
Mhm.
and everything about the way that he taught made drawing just like, infectious, and
Mhm.
so I went to school for graphic design and then I switched my emphasis to painting and drawing, but I was still doing graphic design. So, in
Mhm.
terms of the path,
Mhm.
I sort of thought that I would do graphic design as my job and then I
Mhm.
would do gallery stuff as the fun, wouldn't make a bunch of money, but it would be this sort of interesting part of my life, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of I thought they would be separated.
Mhm.
And then to summarize or what happened was that my graphic design and my my painting and drawing started sort of merging.
Mhm.
And then that turned into illustration. I figured out illustration. And then that's what I've been doing for a long time now.
Okay. I want you to unpack the I figured out illustration. Tell
Well,
me, like,
yeah.
what happened after you graduated, and then when did you get your first paying gig, and how did that happen?
So I think when I said I figured out illustration, what I meant was because I think I still I'm still figuring out stuff all the time. I don't know that there's anything like if we were to pick if we did some kind of pub trivia thing
Mhm.
this weekend or whatever, and then you're like, okay, we need someone who's really good at a singular topic. What's your thing going to be? If I could call my brother and it would be sports. He just
Mhm.
knows everything about sports. And if you said, what would your thing be? I'd be like, I guess the business side of figuring out, you know what I mean,
Mhm.
illustration stuff, or I like drawing turtles, is that a pub quiz topic? So, okay. So I don't mean that I figured out illustration. I mean, I figured out what it was and that there was this
Mhm.
world that I could then start exploring in my early 20s.
Mhm.
And so the way that I started doing it is I started looking at the kinds of projects that I would like to do, but then also slowly started figuring out what I was a good fit for. So I had this
Mhm.
idea early on. There's all these different camps in the illustration world, and maybe you've
Mhm.
seen it, where there are the camps of people that sort of know more about picture books or maybe graphic
Mhm.
novels, and those don't necessarily always those people don't always know the same people, if that makes sense.
Mhm,
They're not
mhm,
always working on the
mhm.
same field. But then there's also what I've always kind of referred to as the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, not the Society of Illustrators
Mm,
group that
mhm.
tended to be more editorial and
Yeah.
more sort of classic illustration stuff. Those
Mhm.
people, obviously, there are people who cross over between those
Right.
groups. I always thought that I would be the more like for adults kind of editorial illustration stuff, which isn't that just so funny to say now? Like,
Yes.
that all right, it's not that funny. No, I'm just kidding. But I think I thought of myself as doing a certain type of, like, sort of decorative, more mature
Mhm,
illustration. I'm saying mature, not italicized or whatever, you're right, I'm
mhm,
not
mhm,
talking
mhm,
whatever.
mhm,
And then I learned I kind of was able to analyze the way that I write and think and
mhm,
draw, and I started realizing that there's this market that I really like, which is so
mhm,
here's how I did that. In my early 20s, when I was applying for my first job out of college, not my first job, but my first job out of college, basically I did it like a scattershot sort of way where I was applying anything that had the name graphic design in it.
mhm,
And some of that would be for a design company. I went and
mhm,
interviewed at a design company that made shirts and like
mhm,
gifts kind of stuff. I did it where I went for an interview at a place that was a graphic design studio, and all that they would work on would be when a big developer comes in and
mhm.
buys a property or develops a property. You know how it's always called like the Arden, you know,
Uh-huh, yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
or
yeah.
like Wild Oaks at Riverview Front.
Yeah.
They're the ones who come up with those names. They do all the branding, they do those images, and I applied to do that. So there's a
Mhm,
different universe
mhm,
where I went and did that instead. But
mhm,
instead, there was a meeting that I went to while I was doing all this applying, and it was to teach graphic design at a very, very small, like, business school,
mhm.
and I got hired that day, I started working that night, and I just taught for the next, I don't know, 15 years, you know, at different places. But the reason I'm saying it is because I did the same thing when I was trying to figure out how to get freelance illustration work. I was basically just submitting to everything that looked like it would have illustration on it. So
Mhm,
I would be sending greeting card ideas out to greeting card companies. I
mhm,
was sending out a lot of kids' book stuff initially. And it's like everything else, like you can't think about it and figure it out, like just sitting and like
mhm,
processing
mhm,
it internally. Everything has to be external, right? I had to
mhm,
make work that
mhm.
worked for these clients. I had to send it out. And it does this is always the point where like I'm answering a question. And I feel like I've been talking too much or like too long. And I'm like, yeah, but we're talking about like, you know, a window of like 10 years of my life. I'm trying to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
boil it down. Yeah.
Well, tell me, what was your first paid illustration gig?
Okay. I'm gonna say a funny one but
Uh-huh,
it's real.
uh-huh,
This might be the first paid illustration gig that I did. When I was in high school,
uh-huh,
I was a sophomore and they were having a senior prom thing.
uh-huh,
And I was at a very, very small high school. There were like 30 people that were graduating and they
uh-huh,
needed somebody to draw the people that were graduating.
uh-huh,
And I said, I don't want to do that. I don't know how to draw like likenesses,
mhm,
but I was the drawing guy, right? And they had this raffle where you had to guess all the pennies that were in a jar,
mhm,
and whoever
mhm.
got the closest got some prize. And they said, "We'll give you all those pennies." Is this how interesting do you think this is right now to somebody listening? I don't know. I'm just saying it. And
We all gotta start somewhere.
we gotta start somewhere, right? And so I got the jar of pennies, that was my
Mhm,
payment, and then I was there at the senior prom where they would show the picture, and people were, like, having to guess who it was, and they were reading attributes of the people, and the drawings that I had done of these people were on the screen in front of all of the seniors and juniors that were in my high school, and everybody was like, "These don't look like the people," which is what I said was gonna happen, and luckily, I thought it was very, very funny. My one superpower is I think that I am often in uncomfortable situations, and I find them very funny. So I thought it was very funny. So and then professionally, my first big children's book, was in my mid-20s. I got offered a project. I sent a manuscript to Penguin, which is now Penguin
Mhm,
Random House, as you know.
mhm,
And an editor there, Susan Cochan, saw the manuscript and she liked the art a lot. She said so. I'm not just, you
mhm,
know. She said she
Mhm.
liked the art, but then she didn't like the manuscripts. She didn't really comment that much on the manuscript. But then she told me that she had a different manuscript and wondered if I would be interested in illustrating it.
Mhm.
And I said yes, and that was my first big there. I had other assignments in between, and I did some magazine stuff for a while. For a while, I was
Mhm.
doing vector illustrations for magazines. Like, do you
Mhm.
remember Ready Made magazine? I did some
Mhm.
portrait vector portraits for Ready Made magazine. Which,
Cool.
can you imagine now? Like, my work a little, I would guess.
Yes.
And I'm not saying, I guess, because I'm just like, oh, my work is so everybody, knows it. I mean, because we're having this interview and we're talking
Mhm.
to each other. But yeah, so the idea that I was doing vector portraits for a while kind of doesn't really make any sense. But
So, would you sum up, I listening to you describe your journey to breaking into the field professionally, there was definitely some advice that I could sense that you are probably giving your students in the getting paid to draw course. Like, what would you say are the lessons that you would draw from those early experiences?
so I think there's a lot of big pieces from it. I could talk the business stuff a lot, but some of the bigger things are, I think, as I mentioned, you can't just make good art and wait for someone to notice it. And that is not anything that I feel like I've learned. It's either because I've done it or because I feel like it is a classic approach to making art, right? Like, or it's this way that when I went to grad school, we did not talk about sending our artwork out at all. We
Mhm.
didn't talk about how to reach out to galleries. We didn't talk, and I was in a painting program in
Mhm.
grad school, and I even had a teacher once. I was framing my drawings,
Mhm.
right? Of course,
Mhm. Mhm.
and for the presentation of it. And at one point, she said, "Why is this framed? I feel like it should be just like wheat pasted up under a bridge somewhere." This is a genuine quote. This is not me making something up. When we're not recording, I'll say the person's name. No, I'm just kidding. But and she was thinking about it in terms of the approach to art making. And I said, um, I this is what I want to do to make a living. I said it's easier for me to sell a framed drawing because it looks nicer like that.
Mhm.
And I said, I would like to turn my art. This is true. I did say this, which is maybe it's a little snarky for grad school. I said, I love drawing and I love sandwiches, and I would love to turn my drawings into sandwiches that I could eat, meaning that I can turn it into money to buy food. And she was really off, she found that very off putting she
Mhm.
said, don't talk about money and art together. It ruins like
Oh,
art. And I was like, I don't think so. I don't think that that's
okay.
true.
Mhm.
And, anyway,
Wow,
so
okay, yeah.
yeah,
Well, I'm gonna skip way ahead because you
sure.
you hit directly on a question that I wanted to ask you about, which is the tension between art and commerce. And I think illustration as a field, of course, is right at that intersection of
That's right.
art and commerce. And so I feel like a lot of people say that there's a tension between them, and I wanted to ask you your opinion about that. Like, do you feel personally for you that there is tension between those 2 things, or do you not feel that way?
I think that there is an internal tension between those 2 things. And I think that what I have to think about is I think the word commerce, it feels gross.
Mhm,
Like, not really, but, like, traditionally, it feels like art and commerce, right? It feels like salesy and
mhm,
addy, and this is something that I've talked a lot about when I'm talking about the course that I made, that I worked on, that I feel like I would have wanted when I was young,
mhm,
or even at points now when I feel sort of stuck. I still feel like if I go on Instagram and I talk about it, I feel like, I don't wanna seem like I'm, like, trying to do, like, this salesy thing,
mhm,
but I think that there's this thing where illustration is not just the combination of commerce and art. It is, but it's also the combination of communication and art, right? It's
mhm,
this thing
mhm,
where it exists in this world where it is, if you take it in school, if it's a communication art. And so what that means is it's not about just creating the art the way that that painting is. Painting is not a communication art, right? It's
mhm,
just fine art with
mhm,
like a capital F and a
mhm.
capital A, right? Fine art. I feel like I was like, am I walking into a trap right now for myself? Like, but illustration is communication art. And I think that when you really think of something in that way, it did not it's saying communication does not denote style. It does
Mhm,
not denote if it's humorous or not or
mhm,
serious. What
mhm,
it means is that I'm making something that I want the reader or the viewer or the one who's interacting with it, I need it to communicate something.
mhm,
And for a graphic novel, it's communicating the story, and the visual side of it or the writing side of it has to
mhm,
make sense, but it
mhm,
has a client, which is the reader or a publisher. It has that person in mind.
mhm,
And I think that that is probably the thing that it took me the longest to figure out in art making
mhm,
was it's not about just making something that works for yourself, but it's something that works for the person who would be using that artwork or the person
mhm.
who would be interacting with that artwork. And I think once you kind of figure that out, it sort of makes the art making part of it significantly easier.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, with your career, it sounds like you broke in your mid-20s with your first children's book project, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you specifically about, the perception that I think it can be easy for people who are newcomers and trying to break in, that the successful people like you know, the ones who are very established in their career, that there's something about them that's kind of charmed and, you have some kind of special superpower that made it easy for you. So I always like to talk about failures or
Yeah.
like significant hurdles. And I'm curious to hear from you. Was there ever a point where you felt like really down about what was going on with a project or with your career?
I for sure. Yeah, I think yeah, absolutely. I think that that happens all the time, and I think sometimes it's big sort of internal things, right? Like even now I've been doing this thing for a really long time and then I sit down to work on a certain type of project that I haven't done in a while or I'm thinking through it and have that moment that a lot of artists have which is how do I draw? Like what's the thing? What do you know, which is so strange, right? Because some people think, "Oh, you hit a certain point with your style where then you're locked in and this is just
Mhm,
how it is." But, there were other things also. So early on, as I mentioned, I thought I would do gallery stuff and I was making these really big drawings and I had a good amount of success in the sense that I was being able to have gallery shows, but
mhm,
not in a sustaining way. It's not where
mhm,
that could be my
mhm,
living at the time. And I had a moment where years ago, I had a big drawing that I'd worked on. I wish I had some sort of scale, but I call them scroll drawings because they would be somewhere between 4 and 6 feet, or let's say 4 and 5 feet tall. And they were
mhm,
really, really, really intricate drawings that I was doing that are very similar to the kind of stuff I'm doing now, but just
mhm,
on big paper and stuff like that.
mhm,
And I had a show where we showed those scroll drawings, and in between we had the smaller drawings because that's what people would buy, right? I could
mhm,
sell a
mhm,
$60 piece, but not like a $2,000 big drawing.
mhm,
And this isn't exactly what you're saying, and I'll talk more about kids' book stuff in a second,
mhm,
but there was a party at the gallery one night, and somebody opened up a bottle of champagne, and it sprayed all over one of those drawings. And the person had to buy that drawing because it was like an organizer of the event, it was their fault and all this stuff.
mhm.
And I was on the email thread where this woman was being forced to buy this drawing that
Uh-huh.
champagne had gotten on, and she, like, desperately did not want it. And can you imagine just how absolutely low I felt about this entire thing, right?
Oh, man.
Maybe that's not I don't know, maybe that's too downer of a story,
Mhm,
but, yeah, I think that I was at a stage where I was making a ton of art. I was
mhm,
incredibly I don't wanna say prolific, but I was working on these pieces in between like, it was like my entire life, right?
mhm,
And and I was not making a living from it. I was enjoying it, so I don't feel like I
mhm,
was this tortured artist that, was
mhm,
down all the time. I was still kind of the same person, but
mhm,
so I think there's that. I think, I've written manuscripts before that I thought were like a home run, and I'm very lucky to have an agent now who is very, just real straightforward with me. It's not like he's riding in a convertible and calls me.
mhm.
He's like, "Oh, hey babe, you're gonna be great," and all this stuff or whatever. Although sometimes artists do kind of want that. But he's just like really straightforward. And he's like, "Yeah, this let's go to the next thing. Like this is not a good thing."
Mhm,
And I really trust that from
mhm.
him. And he explained why and everything. Yeah, I don't know. So that even that's more like it doesn't feel like the lowest point or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I asked this question because I do interact with artists sometimes who are feeling really frustrated, and I guess one thing I'll ask you your opinion about is psychological health. I feel like it is underrated how important it is to building an artistic career. I'll just stop there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. I think I got to see an incredible presentation last year from Marlis de Vries, illustrator who makes some of my favorite diary comics. And she just really opened up about burnout in general. And burnout to me always sounded like, oh, creative block, actually,
Mhm,
And then what she was describing, there were these points of me realizing these things that I thought were like lulls in my ability to make work. It was burnout. It was much
mhm,
more like not clinical,
mhm,
but me realizing that I was sacrificing my mental health for producing a lot of work. So, which I will say, she's going to come give that presentation
mhm,
and getting paid to draw this year because I thought it was so good. I think that there's a million things about it. And I think I am in a spot right now. This is my busiest time of the year for two reasons, which is one, because my I only do it once a year. And then also, there's something about spring that
mhm,
it is the busiest time for me to visit schools. I'm not
mhm,
sure why. I know there's a lot of literacy events at that
mhm,
time. And this is something that my wife and I talk about often is, how do I separate certain things and then like actually stop working at a certain
mhm,
time in the day.
mhm,
And it takes a lot of practice to kind of figure out that stuff.
mhm.
But I know that yeah, it's a lot.
Do you feel like you have an element of workaholism or no?
Well, I don't know. I mean, okay, I would say I've looked back on certain stages and I would say definitely, right?
Mhm,
Like I had this inability of stopping a project until it was completely finished and I could show it off or send it out. And I think even still, there's this aspect where some people ask with me drawing so much, do you stop keeping a sketchbook as much? And I go, well, no, I sort of like stop the work drawing so that I can do the other drawing. I have figured out significantly better how to schedule my time to
mhm,
where I'm still very involved with my family and I do
mhm,
that kind of stuff and then am able to do these work things as well.
mhm,
But that took a lot of time and practice and training and
mhm, mhm.
um yeah, I think I,
Okay, you're getting into a topic that I love talking about because I wrestle with it myself all the time, and I was really curious to ask you about. Can you give me some more specifics about what it is, the habits that you've developed that have been really helpful for you in this regard, or the things you've learned to do differently that allow you to maintain more balance while still getting all the things done that you want to get done?
yeah, so I have a couple of things. There's a one thing that has made a lot of this easier is that I do one of the I think there are certain people that are really great at rendering, and there's certain people
Mhm,
that can really make something very beautiful. And I do feel like I've sort of made my process in this way. I do work pretty quickly. So
mhm,
my final art stage is always the quickest stage of any project that I'm working on. The sketches take a lot longer and that sort of thing.
mhm,
So I want to say just for me personally, the fact that the final art goes sort of fast really helps some of that stuff. But that's just me personally, I guess. I think the biggest thing that I've done that's really helped with mental health stuff, and I'm still working on it. I'm not
mhm,
perfect at this. I really
mhm,
struggle with it. I have been back to back on some things recently. We were out of the country. And then as soon as I came back, I landed and then went to do some school visits, two back to back. And in between, I get to do this stuff, which is
mhm,
easy and fun, and I like
mhm,
to do it. And you and I have spoken about art stuff before, and I feel like eventually one of us has to go. We have to stop talking right? Because we like talking about this stuff. But so I'm not perfect at it, but I think I'm also in very, very big on scheduling stuff.
mhm,
And one of my least favorite parts of my business is having to restart something. So today's a perfect example where I sat down, all I want to do is draw, but I really have to work on sketches for this one book.
mhm,
And so I have to go back into the email, pull out the document, get it all started. So I know that that's not exactly specifically talking about overworking, but
mhm,
creating a schedule so that when I sit down, I know a much clearer idea of what needs to be done right now. And
mhm,
for me right now, it's overlapping projects, but sometimes it's also tasks like because I try to fill in my downtime also if I'm waiting on sketches, feedback, and stuff like that. So I'll make a list of things that are like updating my website with this book that I
Mhm.
haven't posted yet and things like that. But I do think scheduling and making lists, but it's
Mhm.
not just lists. It's like actually adding those things to my schedule so that
Mhm.
when I sit down, I'm not going, oh my gosh, there are a million things. It's so
Mhm.
tough to say, like, hey, update your website
Mhm.
versus rewrite the bio. You have 2 hours to rewrite your bio. I could rewrite a bio in 2 hours. That's
Mhm.
easy. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? But I have to have
Oh,
those
yeah,
little
yeah.
specific things scheduled.
Yeah, so it's not just the scheduling, but also forcing yourself to be specific about the task and, like, using verbs and
That's right. I'm going to give you a good example. And I think that this is something I was not taught. It's something that I learned. And it's about how I
Mhm.
make kids' books. Can you play like a magical sounding theme song when I say
Okay.
this? How to make a kids book with me, author illustrator Mike Lowery. So if
Okay.
I am working on the sketches stage of a book, then I know I need to be working on the rough pitch idea for what a later book would be. Not everybody does it like that, but what I mean is not at the same time. But that means that once I send these sketches off, I know that I'm going to have a window where that's when I could either just not be thinking about art at all, which sometimes is great,
Mhm.
but I know that I might need to pitch a book. But if I put on a calendar, okay, on Wednesday to Friday of that week, work on new kids book.
Mhm.
I'm going to tell you, Mike, right now, if I put that on my calendar, future Mike will sit down and go, all right, what are we working on? And it'll be like, work on new kids book. And you go, I got nothing. I'm all dried up. Nobody likes me anymore, like
Uh-huh.
that. However, if I put on there, um, write out everything that you have about this one concept, right? Just make any note that you have about the one concept about this book that you're working on, or an
Mhm.
idea for a book, or make a list of animals that you want to draw for a possible book.
Mhm.
If I just said, I want to draw a book about a turtle, maybe it knows some sort of martial arts. Maybe it's like not a baby, but it's not really an adult yet. I'm talking about the Ninja Turtles right now. I don't know if you're familiar. It's a licensed property by Eastman and Laird. Anyway, but what you see what I'm saying? Like I could just
Mhm.
sit and brainstorm a list, and you have to break all these things down into these little pieces all the time. And I
Mhm.
think I want to make it really clear, like this is how all of my projects start. It's not
Mhm.
that I'm just sort of walking down the street and whistling, and
Mhm.
then a lightning bolt strikes me, and and then I have this full concept. It always comes from I start making notes. What kind of character would I like to draw? Or from if I go back through old sketchbooks and there was something that I drew that I really liked, I just start asking a bunch of questions. All right, it's a piece of pizza that does this thing. Why? Why is it doing it?
Mhm.
What is it
Mhm.
looking for? And what does it
Mhm.
hate? And what does it love?
Mhm.
So that's how to make a children's book. The end.
Thank you. Thank you for your wisdom there. So, okay, shifting gears from a more general productivity advice to
Sure.
getting paid to draw specifically.
Yeah.
When did you get the idea that you wanted to teach this course? And
Yeah.
how did the idea come to you?
Yeah, that happened because so I started teaching when I was really young. I taught for a very long time. I left teaching. I'm just going to be totally transparent here. I left for two main reasons, which was number one, I was teaching at the Savannah College of Art and Design, the Atlanta campus. I absolutely loved the students. I absolutely loved the program. And it just started becoming a lot of additional work outside of the classroom. And
Mhm.
some people are really well suited for that. And it just wasn't really something that I was enjoying that part of it that much. But at the same time, I had been working as a full time freelance illustrator at that point for probably 8 to 10 years or so. And I was absolutely burning the candle at both ends.
Mhm.
I left teaching. I'd had a book tour that I wasn't going to be able to go on, and then I left. And my wife and I had these long conversations, and really, ultimately, she convinced me that maybe only having one job is a good idea. But I really missed it. So years later, I really missed it. So I started writing these blog posts because I was getting questions from not just beginner illustrators, but other illustrators who primarily worked in one market
Mhm.
and were trying to figure out other markets a little bit better. Maybe they were
Mhm.
children's book authors and illustrators that wanted to do more advertising illustration and that's for stuff, or vice versa. And I was responding to it a lot because it's something that I really liked to do. So I started creating some blog posts and journal entries and newsletter stuff. And then I realized it would kind of make more sense if someone did these things in a structured way.
Mhm.
And so I sat down and for around 8 months to a year, I wrote out if I was leaving school or if I was in my career and I was feeling stuck,
Mhm.
what could I exactly work on for 2 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and it would change that spot. And
Mhm.
I know that sort of sounds big, but that was my goal, is that I wanted to figure out what those things would be. And so I started doing live Zoom stuff and asking a lot of questions from illustrators across the board. What are your questions about the business of illustration? And
Mhm.
I was making lists of those questions, and I wasn't trying to do it in a way that would just be fluffy. And
Mhm.
I wanted to talk about everything from agents, and we've been very lucky to speak to some very good agents. And some of them very specifically who are interested in exactly the market that I really enjoy, which is book illustration. And I mean, kids' graphic novels and stuff. Anyway, and so I made a list of all that stuff, and then I really started targeting it in order, step by step, starting from explaining what a portfolio is supposed to do. Because a
Mhm.
lot of people don't think of a portfolio in in the right way. And again, not of any fault of their own, but because
Mhm.
it's the way that we're taught to see a portfolio. Make great art, people will love it, you'll get
Mhm.
projects, and that's not true. You
Mhm.
have to make great art that makes sense to the person that you're sending it to, and it is something that they could use. So anyway, we start there, and then you build portfolio pieces based on that concept, based on exactly the types of clients that you also. I had a lot of questions about illustration markets because it's something
Mhm.
I didn't know a lot about when I was getting started. But so we brought in people that talk about illustrating for greeting cards, illustrating for editorial stuff for magazines and kids magazines and all kinds of different projects. So that's how I got started, is that I
Mhm.
basically wanted to make what would be life-changing for me when I'm stuck in illustration, and it's principles that I really stand by. So one of the things that we talk about in one of the classes, because I don't want to make it seem like it was just for, people just getting started. In one of the classes, I was talking with a group of students about how you should move away. If you have that pet project that you've
Mhm.
been working on for a few years, and it's like your one concept and you've been lightly touching it, but you've been thinking about it so much, it's so precious that you
Mhm.
can't work on it anymore because you don't want to break it. I
Mhm.
always talk about how you can set that aside and then try to come up with a concept in a certain way that
Mhm.
then can be a project that you feel less, attached to or whatever.
Right.
And in one of the classes, somebody asked me if I had one of those projects. Do you have something that you've like lightly touched for so much that you feel like you don't even know what to do with it anymore? And I said, yes, I did. And I said, here's what I'm going to do. I used the peer pressure, right, of
Mhm.
this class, the accountability. And I sat down, and over the next couple of months, I just did exactly what I always teach on
Mhm.
how to handle a project. I wrote out everything that I knew about it. I explored all of these different directions that it could go. I explored the directions.
Right.
And when I was done, I pitched it, and I'm now working on that series with HarperCollins because I just sat down and did this thing that I've been talking about.
Mentors. You mentioned that you had a mentor from college, a drawing teacher that you really loved, but I'm curious about business mentors. Like, have
Mm,
you, because I can guess that I'm somewhat similar to you in terms of being very excited to write out outlines for things I want to teach, because I think our personalities are somewhat similar. I love that work of like thinking like, how can I convey these
right,
concepts in the clearest way and, make the most impact on people. But then there's all this other stuff like, how do you do a sales page? How do you build an audience? How do you connect with influential people who are going to spread the word? How do you maybe do delegation with the things that maybe you shouldn't be spending your time on? Like all those
right.
businessy kind of things. How have you developed in that regard?
Yeah, I do wish, and I think this was another part of when I was developing the class. I do wish that there were these different stages where I had a certain person that I could ask about these specific things. And that sounds vague, but I will say that I have had it at points. I had an illustration agent fairly early on, and this is somebody that I reference all the time. But when I was doing illustration for Workman Publishing,
Hmm.
I was doing a series with them, and I got connected with an editor there. He was the head of the children's group, program
Hmm.
department, whatever, I don't know, for a while. And it's a guy named Daniel Nayeri who I still interact with today.
Mhm.
Mm, and I got really lucky because this was somebody in the industry. I was somebody who didn't go to school for this stuff, wasn't
Mhm.
connected industry-wise, I didn't work in the
Mhm.
industry, and I had these really big, very specific questions for him, and I was lucky to have people throughout. I have an agent now who I'm able to ask these specific but I still feel like I'm constantly learning new stuff,
Mhm.
and I think I ask a lot of questions, and I think
Mhm.
that that's something that is just a little different maybe from the question, but when I got started, I was in my 20s, and
Mhm.
I thought my responsibility was to be the person that they're hiring because I know all the stuff about it.
Mhm.
And one of the classic and I say this in my class every year, but one of my favorite moments was when, Susan,
Mhm.
at Penguin, now Penguin Random House, called and said that they were gonna send the F and Gs to my house, and I remember being like, "Yeah, I can't wait to see those F and Gs," you know? And, of course, I mean, I had no idea what she was talking about, right? And now and it is my personality, and my personality in work tends to be very similar to, like, if I was sitting out just hanging out or whatever, it'd be this very
Mhm.
similar. And, of course, now I go, "I'm sorry, what did you just say to me?" Like, I don't know what that means. Stop acting don't say code words that almost sound
Mhm.
like bad words.
Mhm.
But at the time, early, I felt like I had to sort of know everything, right?
Mhm.
Which results in you making mistakes, and then they say, "Oh, we said that this was, like, on spec."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I can't wait to on spec a drawing or whatever," and then you realize later that you're like, "No, on spec is not good." Like, on spec is if you're listening and you see us sort of laughing, on spec this is not from the publishing world. This doesn't happen in the publishing world, but, I mean, maybe you have different stories than I do, but on spec is when typically a advertising agency wants you to create a bunch of work in hopes that they can sell it to
Mhm.
their client. And then you might get $25,000 or $150,000 if it's purchased by McDonald's or whatever, but you're just making something without getting paid. And that's not
Mhm.
I haven't seen that in a long time, but
Mhm.
I'm sure of course, I'm sure it still happens. But anyway, what I think a big thing is I asked a lot of questions. If I got not too many to where I'm
Mhm.
not also doing my own due diligence and looking things
Mhm.
up because you can look up F and G. Although I was like, what is she even saying? F and G? What is that even? Because it was over the phone. It wasn't even over an email. So I did ask questions. I have learned as I've gotten older. I ask questions of other artists. I was very lucky recently where I was able to sit down with another illustrator who makes kids books, and we just talked about business stuff. I've been very lucky that people have said, how much they've gotten paid for certain projects,
Mhm.
and it's always incredibly eye-opening, even as someone who's been doing this for a long time. Anyway, so I don't know if I fully answered the question, but I did talk for a significant amount of time, which sometimes sounds like answering a question.
So in terms of building an online course business, did you talk to people about that? Did you read books about it? Did you take a course yourself or anything like that?
So, yeah, okay, so that's actually a really specific, great question. So, I am friends with an illustrator named Sarah Watts, and
Mhm.
Sarah has an online course that's about making patterns. She is somebody so she and I had these long conversations where I'm sure you've seen it that there's people that make look, we have spoken before about this, maybe even today before we hit record. I don't talk negative stuff about anybody.
Mhm.
Everything that I say I learned it's because of a mistake that I made. But I'm gonna say, I don't know that I would wanna take a course from somebody and it's not their job or their expertise. Like, if it's somebody
Mhm.
that's, like, talking about a business, I
Mhm.
like to see that they've done the thing that they're talking about, and Sarah is that. So Sarah has a class that's called From Print to Pattern, and she's a pattern designer. She's an illustrator, she's a working illustrator, and she teaches this class, and so we are best friends, like, her husband and I, when I take, like, trips with friends, I travel
Mhm.
with her husband once a year,
Mhm.
so I don't need to say all that. I'm gonna start listing the places that Scott and I have we went to, no. But we're very close, and so we sat and talked for a long time, and I had been doing, some online course stuff, but was thinking about maybe offering these Zoom meetups and stuff
Mhm.
like that. So in that particular way, um, I had this great friend who was very open that was then
Mhm.
able to say, I use this platform.
Mhm.
these are some things that I like about it, some things that I don't like about it. And also then when it came time for me to teach a class, I go so deep into the researching the best ways of doing certain things. Like, for
Mhm.
example, right now, I'm in a spot where I've been using one email platform and have been thinking about switching over, but I don't read some slick video on
Mhm.
YouTube or watch some video on YouTube. I really try to sit down and read like comparisons and things like that,
Mhm.
which can sometimes get a little too much in the weeds.
Mhm.
So anyway, so yes, I did have someone in that regard, but
Mhm.
also I am a deep dive
Mhm.
research,
Mhm.
and I don't know if it's picking up right now. There's the most insane thunderstorm that's happening right now.
No,
You
not
can't
at
hear it at all.
all.
I mean, it is
No.
like shaking the house and it's
Whoa.
very sunny outside. I'm gonna say I love it. It's so it makes what I'm saying incredibly like dramatic. If you're not
If
hearing
only I
it,
could hear it. I've gotta add in the B track for the
yeah, if you could add it in later, I think, and if you could actually add some flashing lights, it's not lightning right now. I
okay.
was under the impression that thunder only happens when it's raining
Uh-huh.
because of that scientifically sound argument that's made in a Fleetwood Mac song, but it's not raining. Anyway, sorry to get distracted for a second. But I think in general, someone connecting with a mentor, whether it's about their illustration, like, I focus on the illustration sort of business part of it. And then
Mhm.
some people, and you and I have talked about this before, and I know that this is something that you do, but I think that there's a lot of illustrators that don't know how to make the jump into writing their own stories,
Mhm.
even though they have all the elements, they have all
Mhm.
of the pieces to it. And it's just that putting it together into the story or making the book pitch, which as much as I like outlining, I love making a good book pitch.
Mhm.
I've been working on it for all this time, and then
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
made one recently and was, like, updating it on a flight, and a
Mhm.
guy slammed his chair back, and I have the laptop out, and I was still in such a good mood for making this pitch, it didn't even faze me, didn't even bother me. It did. I actually loudly said something kinda negative out loud, but I wasn't doing it on purpose, but it startled me. Anyway, so I
Oh, I
like
thought
that
you were
stuff.
gonna say he leaned over and he was like, "Amazing book pitch."
He said, "I just had to get closer, to the forehead with my back in my chair." Yeah,
Okay. Okay, so, I know we've been on for, more than an hour, but a few more questions if you
sure.
do you have time?
Yeah,
Okay, outsourcing and delegating. That
yeah,
is something else that I think people in general wrestle with a lot. Personally, I believe that when you can finally make that jump to be able to do that, it unlocks amazing potential, but it's very difficult to do. I think it's difficult from a resource perspective,
right,
paying somebody else is a big deal, and then it's also difficult from, well, certainly for artists, I think to let go,
yeah,
if we're talking specifically about outsourcing some aspect of your art, or on the other hand, like you have an assistant who helps like with your email, like letting
right.
somebody into your personal email to answer things for you. So, can you talk about how you've progressed on that?
Definitely. I wanna say a quick thought. So we're gonna talk about delegating, but before we do, I wanna say a quick thing to anybody that's listening, which is that you are not when you see somebody who's writing and illustrating their own books, maybe it's me, maybe it's somebody else, right? If you see, like, the amount of books Dan Santat is making or, you see these, like, Dogman books coming out all the time.
Mhm,
I just wanna say something really quickly is that those people don't naturally have all of the different pieces already ingrained in them, like coming up with stories and
mhm,
outlining books and all that
mhm,
stuff. People get the right kind of help at the right kind of time. So I'm going back to your previous question just for that
mhm.
split second,
Okay.
because I think that it's something that the reason that I'm able to write my own books is because I have had at points, I mentioned Daniel before,
Mhm,
but I've had people in my life that have helped me learn that skill. And I have researched and read and learned, taken classes and things like that. And that has helped immensely. I took a writing class like as an author, right? Like as a
mhm,
published author, I took a writing class, an online writing class. I think it was like maybe during the like lockdowny like
mhm,
era or whatever through Second City
mhm,
with no intention of doing any kind of improv writing or not improv, but like sketch writing or whatever,
mhm.
just because I was interested in taking a writing class from a different perspective. And they just broke down these really specific aspects of writing to where they're giving you a structure and then you're able to come up with a story
Mhm.
based on a structure. And I think knowing those kind of structures and stuff. I'm going to jump to the next question, but I wanted to say that because that's a thing that I love to talk about and read and research, but I didn't know that. I just thought there were these like people that were already mentally equipped to do everything.
Right, right, right. I
And
know
so
what
then
you're
that leads over into the delegation thing. So as you mentioned, so starting, I would say 4 years. Well, I'm so terrible with time. And if
Mhm.
Mandy heard me say it, she would say like four, like I don't know. Let's say a few years ago, I was working on this class and I was getting a lot of emails about setting up scheduling and things like that. And then also a big part of my job is I visit schools. And
Mhm.
if you visit a school, and I talk about making books and my work and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And if you visit a school, there is a lot of emails,
Mhm.
making sure that certain paperwork is filled out, them double checking your calendar and talking about fees and
Mhm.
AV equipment and all of these things. So a few years ago, it's a friend of ours, but who has done this in the past. And so it worked out perfectly because I already knew the person and I already knew she had a
Mhm.
background, like she worked for record labels and stuff like that. So it was this really great way of doing it. And I had tried to delegate very small jobs in the past on a part-time basis and tried to find them through, I can't even remember the I can't is it maybe it's called Upwork or
Oh, yeah,
something like
yeah.
that.
Mhm.
I think it was Upwork and it was terrible. I hated it. I
Mhm.
really didn't like any of and it not because of Upwork, but because I had these specific types of jobs that I needed
Mhm.
done.
Mhm.
And I didn't have a good experience with it, but I did. Mandy and I have now been working together for years. And so she has become initially was supposed to just help with emails and now is a studio coordinator, helping
Mhm.
me know when certain events are happening, stuff like that. So that is not any kind of advice because I have this really specific thing that I needed and it took the very specific type of person for it to work. I had we have to have conversations about, is this, communication and all these other things just
Mhm.
to make sure. I want to make sure that mostly so that I'm not answering questions that she would have or something like that. So I do think delegation is a big thing. I think sometimes people think about it too early.
Mm.
I want to say that sometimes people think that getting an agent is a form of delegation
Mm.
because I think that some people think that then I'll get an agent and then I can make art and only make art. And then the agent will do all of these other things for me. And I know that you know that that's not true. And I think, yeah. So I don't really have a good advice in that other than this one area has really helped me. I can visit more schools because of it, because I
Mhm.
have now have the like capacity to be able to keep up with the amount of emails. Oh, I'm doing one school here in town which I
Mhm.
think the school would be mortified if they knew that I was mentioning this right now. And there's a certain form that I had to get approved to be able to go onto campus. And it has been, even for me, it has been just a huge amount of work. But those things kind of add up, right?
Yes, yes, yes. Totally.
But another version of that would be finding somebody who would color. If you make graphic novels, finding somebody that
Mhm.
would color it is
Or
such a
even
great,
flatting, yeah.
or even what?
Flatting, like
Yeah,
just doing
yeah,
the
just
flats.
doing the flats even. So I think that finding someone in that way, I think it can be pretty good.
Okay. I think I got through most of my questions, so I'm gonna ask you the last one, which
Mhm,
is advice to people, just general advice to people who wanna break in, like people now, because
mhm.
when we started our careers is a very different time than where things are right now. So do you feel like is there anything twist on the advice you would give to people now that would be different from people in the late 90s breaking in?
Yeah, I think a couple of big things. I mean, I feel like I could let's on this last question, let's just go ahead and double the time of this episode or whatever, or like this meetup. I think there's a lot of big things. And I think one of the biggest things would be, I think maybe, I don't know, maybe you would have some thoughts on this. Maybe
Mhm.
people's view on growing that Instagram number, I think that that's probably gone down because it like the importance of
Mhm.
doing it has maybe gone down because it seems like it just doesn't seem like a thing that happens anymore that
Mhm.
I don't know, but maybe I'm wrong. But I think that the primary goal would be to directly connect with clients, not with trying to grow some sort of online platform. Unless
Mhm.
you're wanting to sell your own books, if you want to self-publish, if you want to make mini comics and things like that, growing
Mhm.
a newsletter is great. And I think in
Mhm.
general, any artist growing your newsletter is great. I have micro advice on all of these big pieces of macro
Mhm.
advice, but
Mhm.
I would say don't charge for your newsletter until you're churning out something that's worth paying for, you know? I would say just make it this free newsletter that's sort of updating people on what you're working on and maybe telling some in between me announcing new books, I will send out a lot of diary comics, which hopefully I would want to read that, from other artists. So anyway, I think directly connecting with art directors and potential clients is significantly more necessary than making content, like just stuff to post.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just one of a million things that I could say to somebody. I'm going to say something, which is every time we have these conversations, and again, then we go, at some point we have to cut it off. But this is why I started the class, right? This is why I invite people like you to come and discuss this stuff so that I can say, I did not know until I was in my 30s, really. And I had an agent for a long time. I didn't really know the full expectations of an agent for a very long time, right? And so I think that you can bring someone in and you can say, how could I start a story? How do I make a book pitch? And what are the things that I put together? Because there's so many of these things. There's not just one thing. Because you can't just submit your work to an illustrator. You have to to an art director. You have to submit work that they can use. And how do you connect with that art director? How do you find their information? And what do you say? And so I think it's all of these things and all of them fit together.
Well, we didn't talk about AI at all.
Thank goodness.
And I think that ending on this note of like connecting with other human beings is probably the single most important advice that you could give to artists who want to make a living.
Not just make a living, but to have a good life. I want to say connecting with art directors to get your work published is important. It's great. And that's how you make a career. And I want to say, I'm putting this out there because this is now my personal goal. Something happened, and we all know what it was. A few years ago, there was this big event, and a lot of us were not getting together. And then some of us kept up not getting together. And I am actively trying to reconfigure to where I was reading Brian Biggs's newsletter today, actually, and he was talking about meeting up with other illustrators in Philadelphia. And I was like, this is me now. I want to do more of these events and I want to do in-person stuff that has nothing to do with promoting anything. But I did one. I was in Japan for some school visits and I was able to get together with a group of children's book writers and illustrators. I gave a talk, but then we were just able to talk about what we're working on. And I just think that it just changes your entire life to have
Yeah.
communication in this way.
Yeah. All right. So speaking of communicating, how can people connect with you? What do you want to tell everybody about what's going on with you right now?
So in the next couple of days, I'm going to do a free workshop where we do one portfolio piece from start to finish. That's the illustration portfolio challenge. And it takes away all the scary aspects of and it's for everybody, right? It's not for people that want to do kids books. It's not for people that want to do just kids comics or whatever the thing is. That is over a couple of days, you'll make a portfolio piece from start to finish. That's the illustration portfolio challenge. It's on gettingpaidtodraw.com. And then my big class, which is 8 weeks, starts soon. And for 8 weeks, you're going to build 4 illustration portfolio pieces. It is, if you want to do kids comics, if you want to do or any kind of comics, graphic novels, but it's also if you want to do editorial stuff that helps pay the bills in between. I'm going to tell you all something that you've never heard before. I make kids graphic novels and they take a very long time. So in between, I'm working on other projects and I'm going to tell you about a lot of that kind of stuff too. So we're going to do that. And that's getting paid to draw. But then if you don't want to see any of that stuff and you just want to see my drawings, you can look at Instagram, which is Mike Lowery Studio.